Mr. Speaker, by the direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 1430 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 88, House Resolution 1430. Resolved that at any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 1398 to establish the CCP Initiative Program and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on the Judiciary or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on the Judiciary, now printed in the bill, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 118-45 shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. The bill as amended shall be considered as the original bill for the purpose of further amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. No further amendment to the bill as amended shall be in order except those printed in Part A of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such further amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as order on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 2. At any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 1425 to require any convention, agreement, or other international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and response reached by the World Health Assembly to be subject to Senate ratification. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Foreign Affairs or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. An amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 118-44 shall be considered as adopted in the House and the Committee of the Whole. The bill as amended shall be considered as the original bill for the purpose of further amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. No further amendment to the bill as amended shall be in order except those printed in Part B of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such further amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as order on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 3. At any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill H.R. 1516 to establish Department of Homeland Security funding, restrictions on institutions of higher education that have a relationship with the Confucius Institutes, and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Homeland Security or their respective designees. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. In lieu of the amendment in the nature of a substitute, recommended by the Committee on Homeland Security now printed in the bill, pursuant to Part 2 of House Report 118-319, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 118-46, shall be considered as adopted in the House and in the Committee of the Whole. The bill as amended shall be considered as the original bill for the purpose of further amendment under the 5-minute rule and shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. No further amendment to the bill as amended shall be in order except those printed in Part C of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such further amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such further amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill as amended to the House with such further amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as order on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit. Section 4. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 7980 to amend the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 to exclude vehicles the batteries of which contain materials sourced from prohibited foreign entities from the Clean Vehicle Credit. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The amendment in the nature of a substitute recommended by the Committee on Ways and Means, now printed in the bill, shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill as amended are waived. The previous question shall be considered as order on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means or the respective designees, and 2, 1 motion to recommit. Section 5. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 9456 to amend the Defense Production Act of 1950 with respect to foreign investments in United States agriculture and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. The previous question shall be considered as order on the bill and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Financial Services or the respective designees, and 2, 1 motion to recommit. Section 6. Upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House the bill H.R. 9494, making continuing appropriations for fiscal year 2025 and for other purposes. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. The amendment printed in Part D of the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution shall be considered as adopted. The bill as amended shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions of the bill as amended are waived. The previous question shall be considered as order on the bill as amended and on any further amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations or their respective designees, and 2, 1 motion to recommit.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 hour.
For the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts, Representative McGovern, pending which I yield myself as much time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
House Resolution 1430 provides for consideration of 6 measures: H.R. 1398, H.R. 1425, H.R. 1516, H.R. 7980, H.R. 9546, and H.R. 9494. The rule provides for H.R. 1398 to be considered under a structured rule, with 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Judiciary Committee or their designees, and provides for 1 motion to recommit. The rule also provides for H.R. 1425 to be considered under a structured rule, with 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Foreign Affairs Committee or their designees, and provides for 1 motion to recommit. The rule also provides for H.R. 1516 to be considered under a structured rule, with 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Homeland Security Committee, and provides for 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 7980 under a closed rule, with 1 hour of debate equally divided between the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means, and provides for 1 motion to recommit. The rule further provides for consideration of H.R. 9456 under a closed rule, with 1 hour of debate equally divided between the chair and the ranking minority member of the Agriculture Committee, and provides for 1 motion to recommit. And finally, the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 9494 under a closed rule, with 1 hour of debate equally divided between the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Appropriations, and provides for 1 motion to recommit. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this rule and in support of the underlying legislation. The rule before us provides for consideration of 5 measures aimed at protecting the American people from the greatest threat to our sovereignty, our national security, and our prosperity, the Chinese Communist Party. Let's start with H.R. 1398, Protect America's Innovation and Economic Security from CCP Act of 2024. This bill will reestablish the CCP initiative at the Department of Justice, an effort that was originally established by President Trump, which successfully combated espionage, hacking, and theft of American trade secrets. And you know what? It worked. Under Trump's leadership, we saw 45 individuals convicted or plead guilty to espionage. But in yet another surrender to the woke mob, the Biden-Harris administration, with 0 justification, they shut it down. They shut it down cold. They claimed it stoked anti-Asian bias. That argument is just not wrong. It's an insult to every American. Shutting down the China initiative proves that this administration cares more about appeasing the extreme left than it does our national security. H.R. 1398 will get us back on track, despite President Biden and Vice President Harris's refusal to do so. Now, while the Biden-Harris administration is shutting down efforts to prosecute spies, they're bending over backwards to negotiate a new pandemic accord with the WHO, an organization that sold out the United States and the world to the Chinese Communist Party during the COVID-19 pandemic. As of now, the pandemic accord the Biden-Harris administration is negotiating with the World Health Assembly is intended to tie our country to responsibilities and obligations overseen by an organization that lied for and covered for the Chinese Communist Party as it deceived the world about the origins and the spread of COVID-19. Now, let's not forget how at the onset of COVID-19's pandemic in 2020, the WHO Director General visited Beijing and praised China for, quote, setting a new standard for outbreak control. Simultaneously, the CCP was busy arresting citizens for, quote, spreading rumors of a COVID-19 outbreak in Wuhan. That was in the first months of 2020. The WHO went along with the CCP's propaganda, and millions died from a pandemic whose spread could have been contained far earlier. H.R. 1425, the WHO Pandemic Preparedness Treaty without Senate Approval Act, would require that any pandemic-related convention of the WHO that purports to bind the United States must be considered and ratified by the Senate as a treaty subject to the requirements of Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution. Mr. Speaker, hardworking American taxpayers should not be subjected to sweeping new international agreements that could tie them to organizations like the WHO and policies that run contrary to their own interests without any real say in the matter. Additionally, under the rule, House Republicans have brought forward H.R. 1516, the DHS Restrictions on Confucius Institutes and Chinese Entities of Concern Act. Since 2005, the Chinese government has sponsored Confucius Institutes at American universities, ostensibly to teach Chinese language and facilitate cultural exchanges. However, These institutes are a cover for the CCP's global influence and propaganda campaign. I've seen it in my own district. This bill will cut off Homeland Security funding for any university that maintains relationships with these entities. Now, let's be clear. The Chinese Communist Party's ultimate goal is to build the most advanced military in the world by 2049. And they're stealing our intellectual property to do so. House Republicans simply will not stand by idly and let that happen at our higher learning institutions. Next under the rule, we're considering H.R. 7980, the End Chinese Dominance of Electric Vehicles in America Act of 2024, which would put an end to the Biden-Harris sellout to China in the name of a Green New Deal. The Inflation Reduction Act opened the door for Chinese companies to profit from electric vehicle tax subsidies, leaving American families to foot the bill for these policies while China laughs all the way to the bank. We've seen the Biden administration's game. They claim to be tough on China, but behind closed doors, they're cutting deals that enrich the CCP. In its rulemaking on the electric vehicle tax subsidy, the Biden-Harris administration decided that, quote, unofficial ties to the Chinese Communist Party were perfectly fine for the Chinese entity wishing to qualify. Now, apparently, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle and the Biden-Harris administration have little understanding of how communist China works. Unofficial or official, for a company to operate and be successful, you must be subservient to the interests of the Chinese Communist Party. H.R. 7980 will put an end to this asinine America Last policy and ensure that vehicles with batteries sourced from foreign prohibited entities, like those connected to the CCP, do not qualify for this tax credit. Additionally, the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 9456, the Protecting American Agriculture from Foreign Adversaries Act. 40 million acres of America's farmland are in the hands of foreign entities. As a representative of the hardworking family farmers in Western New York and the Southern Tier, I know firsthand the impact that foreign entities gobbling up American farmland can have on the success of our domestic farmers. It's driving the entry costs of potential new farmers to be higher with each passing year. The land where American farmers grow our food, our fuel, and fiber is precious and should be treated as such. H.R. 9456 will ensure that the Secretary of Agriculture has a seat on the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States and will require that the American people have a full understanding of just how much investment in our agricultural land is being pursued by China and entities connected to the Chinese Communist Party. This legislation, of which I am a proud co-sponsor, is an important first step in ensuring that the CCP, through its loyal entities, is not able to buy up our most precious commodity, our land, threatening our national security, our sovereignty, and our ability to feed ourselves. Food is security and will always be national security. And finally, Mr. Speaker, the rule before us includes consideration of H.R. 9494, a continuing resolution to extend government funding at current levels through March 28th, 2025. To date, the House has passed legislation to fund more than 70% of our federal government operations for fiscal year 2025. Meanwhile, Senate Democrats have failed to bring forward a single fiscal year 2025 appropriations bill to the floor. This continuing resolution avoids a government shutdown, but it also includes the SAVE Act, requiring proof of United States citizenship to vote in federal elections. Democrats' open border policies have turned our country into a sanctuary for illegal aliens, and now they want them to vote. The SAVE Act ensures that only American citizens decide America's future. The Democrats' open border policies have brought nothing but chaos and destruction to our communities as millions of illegal aliens have flooded into this country. The left's refusal to secure our borders is deliberate and a direct threat to our democratic institutions, as a growing number of non-citizens are registered to vote and have been found to vote in our local, state, and federal elections. By allowing non-citizens to vote, they dilute the voice of every American citizen, undermining what should be a free and fair election. Mr. Speaker, our country was built on the principles of freedom, fairness, and justice. This administration's policies are a slap in the face to every immigrant who's followed a legal path to citizenship, who have respected our laws, and who have earned their right to participate in our democracy. That is something we should all agree on, we should all support, and we should all fight for. It's simple common sense. I urge my colleagues to support this rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the gentleman from New York for yielding me the customary 30 minutes, and I yield myself such time as they may consume.
The gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, this entire Republican majority has been one gigantic, complete, total failure. A complete mess from day one with these people in charge. It's an embarrassment. We've got 8 weeks left in the 118th Congress to do our legislative work. 8 weeks. And instead of doing something to make life better for anyone, or hell, even the bare minimum by stopping a government shutdown, we are considering a no-good stopgap resolution that extends funding into 2025. And you got to love this. You got to love this. The gentleman from New York is on the floor today trying to convince everyone to vote for the bill, when Republicans cannot even convince their own members to vote for it. I mean, seriously, every minute I look at my phone, I see another Republican defecting. Mr. Speaker, the Republican manager is wasting his time debating me. He needs to be debating his Republican friends who are coming out against the bill in droves. Clearly, they don't have the votes for this awful plan, so why are we wasting time here in this House on a bill that has no chance whatsoever of ever becoming law? Mr. Speaker, this is embarrassing for your side of the aisle. It's mid-September. Republicans said they would get all 12 separate appropriation bills done before we left for the August break. Yet another broken promise among a long list from Speaker Johnson to add on to all the broken promises from Speaker McCarthy before him. And House Republicans are once again showing their deep disrespect for the veterans community by proposing a 6-month CR that shortchanges the VA cost of war toxic exposures fund by $12 billion. $12 billion. That is morally reprehensible and just plain cruel. These are our veterans who we're talking about. How the hell can they turn their backs on our veterans? But to be clear, this is the Republican playbook. A big promise, and it gets broken. A promise like we will have a robust, effective appropriations process, and it gets broken. A promise to continue supporting our veterans, and it gets broken. And now we are headed into another potential shutdown, all because they want to play political games. And to make matters worse, Mr. Speaker, Republicans have jammed the SAVE Act onto the CR. Because why not mix up government funding with more ridiculous conspiracy theories about voter fraud? I know why they want to bring this bill to the floor. They are worried they won't win in November without pushing conspiracy theories. Mr. Speaker, let's set something straight. Non-citizens cannot vote in federal elections. Let me repeat that. Non-citizens cannot vote in federal elections. And if they vote, it is illegal. It is a crime. And guess what? They've done studies. Even conservative institutes say there is no evidence that non-citizens voted illegally in large enough numbers to shift the outcome of any election. We all know what this is about. It's not about voter fraud. This is part of their Project 2025 plan to undermine the vote count and take total control of the government. You see, Mr. Speaker, they want power whether they win or lose at the ballot box. And so they will claim voter fraud whatever happens. The facts be damned. I mean, do Republicans really want to talk about the threat of voter fraud? Well, let me remind the American people, the only ones committing voter fraud in an attempt to overthrow an election are Republicans. We've seen this movie before. Following Trump's loss in the 2020 election, he and his cronies allegedly conspired to overturn the will of the American people by submitting fake electors to falsely certify that Trump won the election. He didn't win the election. He lost the election. And what did those efforts get them? Well, let me tell you. Dozens of people across 4 states have been indicted over this election fraud scheme. So, Republicans want to talk about the threat of voter fraud? Give me a break. They are the threat. This horrible CR will never become law the way it is structured. We really are just here wasting more time after House Republicans failed to do what they should have done months ago. This rule before us today would also bring to the floor 5 bills that Republicans claim will target China. 5 bills that are actually weak on China. 5 ineffective bills that don't get the job done and don't represent a real attempt to actually address some of the very serious concerns we have about the PRC. Mr. Speaker, I've been a critic of China's human rights record for decades, longer than some of my colleagues have been in Congress. Hell, I was sanctioned by the Chinese government in July. I can't travel to China. My wife can't travel to China. My son can't travel to China. My daughter can't travel to China. I can't even converse with any Chinese officials. You know, I've written strong, effective bills that would hold the PRC accountable. And so they don't like me. They sanction me, and I wear that sanction as a badge of honor. But let me be clear, these bills that the gentleman referred to are not about taking a strong stance against China. They're poorly written, weak bills that don't get the job done. It's like they're like written for a press release. Oh, I'm sorry, because they are meant for a press release, not about serious legislating. Believe it or not, we can strengthen our national security. We can stand up to China on human rights, and we can support our veterans and make sure they get the care that they need. We can fund the government, and we can do all of that and more if we work together. That's what people want. They want us to behave like adults. Sadly, Republican leadership is more interested in sound bites and Fox News headlines heading into November than they are about governing. And I would say they would rather put politics ahead of progress. But, Mr. Speaker, Project 2025 isn't just politics. It's weird, it's shameful, and it's deeply dystopian. It's dangerous stuff. Americans are tired of this garbage, and I think they are about to make some very different choices starting November. And with that, I reserve my time.
The chair would remind members refrain from engaging personalities towards nominees for the office of the president, and also maintain decorum on choice of vernacular. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, in case my colleague on the other side of the aisle has a case of amnesia, earlier this year, 195 Democrats proudly voted no on the passage of H.R. 8580. The fiscal year 2025 Military Construction, Veterans Affairs Appropriations Bill. This legislation includes $337.4 billion for the VA, $75.5 million above President Biden's own budget request, and $30.2 billion more than the fiscal year 2024 levels. It allocates $112.6 billion for medical care for our veterans. And, Mr. Speaker, 195 House Democrats, including my colleague from Massachusetts, voted no on this bill. And here we are, with Senate Democrats refusing to even bring up the bill on the floor. Every day they delay is a day that veterans across America are left wondering if their health care, their benefits, and their essential services will be there next year. This is simply unacceptable. Senator Chuck Schumer could bring this bill forward tomorrow. We could get this done for our veterans tomorrow. But instead, Senate Democrats have decided to play politics with the lives of our nation's heroes, labeling this vital funding as dead on arrival and offering no alternative while the clock ticks down. Mr. Speaker, it's time that my Democratic colleagues across the aisle stop playing politics in this chamber and in the upper chamber prioritize what really matters. Veterans across this nation depend on the services provided by the VA. Let's stop the hysteria in the political games. Let's pass this continuing resolution, avoid a shutdown, and continue our work to fully fund the VA. Our veterans have given everything for us, and I'm asking my colleagues to give them the support that they deserve. And now, Mr. Speaker, I yield 3 minutes to the chairman of the Rules Committee, the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Chairman Michael Burgess.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I want to thank the representative from New York for yielding me the time. I rise in support of the rule. I rise in support of the underlying bills, in particular H.R. 9494, to provide continuing funding for the government of the United States for the next 6 months. House Republicans have done the work of funding our federal agencies. Our Appropriations Committee has passed all 12 bills out of committee. 5 of those have passed on the floor. Over 70% of the funding for the federal government has already been passed by the House. Unfortunately, the Senate continues to stall. To be clear, the Senate has not passed a single appropriations bill. Funding does expire at the end of this month. September 30th occurs the same time every year, just like Christmas, just like Halloween. Should not be a surprise to the Majority Leader of the United States Senate. With funding expiring at the end of this month, it's unfortunate but necessary to pass a continuing resolution so that the government continues to operate while the other body continues to stall. And here's another thing. I frankly do not understand why the President of the United States would even consider vetoing this legislative measure while members of his own party refuse to come to the table to negotiate with Republicans. House Republicans will not be responsible if there is an appropriations lapse. If there is an appropriations lapse, that falls squarely on the shoulders of the other body and the Democrats in charge. This is why I will be supporting the passage of the continuing resolution. We have to put personal politics aside and do what is right for everyday Americans. We also have the opportunity in this legislation to pass the SAVE Act, which will ensure that only American citizens have a voice in our elections. Look, it's against the law for teenagers to buy alcohol, but sometimes they do, or try to, and that's stopped because they have to show an ID at the counter. We understand that it is illegal for people who are not citizens to vote in federal elections, and yet sometimes people try. Sometimes they're not even aware that they're not supposed to do that. But this will ensure that only American citizens vote in American elections. And unfortunately, in the Rules Committee yesterday, they kind of said the quiet part out loud. Why would the border czar allow 12 million undocumented individuals into this country over the last 3.5 years? Well, the answer is they want them to become voters. The SAVE Act prevents that from happening. American citizens only voting in American elections. 86% of Americans support that concept. Thanks to the Biden-Harris administration, illegal immigrants not only have a free pass across our border, but soon to our ballot boxes. Election security is national security. The choice is simple. Vote for election integrity or vote for foreign influence and rising crime. For my part, I believe we need to pass this common sense legislation. Pass it today, pass it this week. I urge members to support this rule today and the underlying legislation. Only American citizens voting in American elections. I yield back to the gentleman from New York.
Reserve.
Reserve. Gentleman from Massachusetts is
Thank you,
recognized.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's unbelievable. I mean, all we heard last night and we're hearing now on the House floor from the other side is that it's the Senate's fault. That's the reason why House Republicans aren't doing their job, and that's why they're pushing this misguided CR. It's because of Senate Democrats. We just heard that again today. And guess what? I have a newsflash. Even Republican senators hate this CR plan. I ask unanimous consent to insert an article into the record from News Nation entitled, quote, House GOP government funding plan gets chilly reception from Senate Republicans, end quote.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, their own colleagues, their own Republican colleagues are worried that, and I quote, that this measure requiring proof of citizenship to register to vote would complicate the stopgap funding bill's path, and that this comes dangerously close to risking a shutdown. Now, here's an idea. If Republicans are so serious about this CR, maybe they should have done some work to shore up support within their own party. But let me just talk about how Republicans feel about this CR. Tom Massey on the Rules Committee, he tweeted, "I'm voting hell no on the continuing resolution and the Other Matter Act this week. I don't care which bright, shiny object is attached to it or which fake fight we start and won't finish." And then the gentleman from New York started to talk about national security. Here's another news flash for the gentleman, that the top Republican national security expert in the House, the chairman, the Republican chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Mike Rogers, says he is a no on the CR. He says it's bad for the Pentagon, and he hopes that other House members will vote no too. That's your top guy on national security. He's voting no. It's reported from Melanie Zenona that Rep. Corey Mills says he has informed the whip team that he's a no on the 6-month CR plus SAVE Act. Also says there are quite a few other Republicans who are against it who haven't said so publicly. Matt Rosendale said, he tweets, "1 year later, the same old theatrics by the DC cartel. I've never voted for a CR and never intend to." John Bresnahan reports that Representative Jim Banks is a no on the CR. Jordan Carney reports that Representative Burchett says he's currently a no on the CR plus SAVE plan. And he says that there are many, many others that want to vote no. Marjorie Taylor Greene, well, she's no on everything, so she's no on this as well. But I have to be honest with the gentleman. Your problem isn't House Democrats or Senate Democrats. Your problem is House Republicans. You can't even get consensus amongst your own members of your own party. So this is ridiculous that we're here debating this rule to bring up a CR that is going nowhere fast. And let me say, last night in the Rules Committee, our colleague, Representative Massey, he said, this SAVE Act isn't going to save anything. Again, Representative Massey, as everybody knows, is a prominent leader in the Republican caucus. He says, and particularly because it ain't never going to become law. It's a false promise to get all the Republicans half pregnant. And then you're going to get fully pregnant by the end of September when you vote for the CR that is not going to have it in it. I hate to break it to you, and I'm not telling you anything special, and I hate to break it to the Republicans, but you ain't getting the SAVE Act. And then he concludes by saying, but this is political theater, folks. And I got to tell you, it's bad political theater. And it's pathetic that here we are at this late date, approaching a government shutdown, and we get this garbage. And at this point, I'd like to yield 3.5 minutes to the gentlewoman from New Mexico, a distinguished member of the Rules Committee, Ms. Ledger Fernandez.
The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Ranking Member McGovern, to pointing out what we heard last night. This is all political theater. That's what we heard last night. That's what we're hearing on the floor today. But is that what I heard when I was in New Mexico? No, in New Mexico, what I heard in the fields and at the markets was ranchers and farmers actually anxiously asking about the Farm Bill. What I heard was veterans who marched in the Bean Day Parade describing how their health would suffer dramatically if we don't pass a VA supplemental. Families told me they want Congress to work together on a bipartisan matter, which this is not. They want us to work together to make their lives better. We have 12 legislative days to do Congress's basic job: fund the government, fund veterans programs, fund emergency programs, pass a farm bill. Instead of funding our nation's obligations, the Republicans are toying with a government shutdown yet again. Instead, the Republicans' Armed Service Committee chair called this temporary funding terrible. Your own chair of Armed Services called this, quote, terrible. Their CR also fails to fund disaster relief as wildfires, hurricanes, and floods devastate the countryside. Businesses and neighbors in New Mexico and across the country won't get the emergency relief they deserve unless Congress funds FEMA. Instead of living up to their obligations, Republicans are using this funding deadline to make it harder for American citizens to vote. They've included their voting restriction bill as a poison pill on this CR. What is the real-life consequence of their voting restriction bill? With a military ID, you can fight and die for this country, but Republicans won't let you use it alone to register to vote. Why would House Republicans make it harder for service members, for recently married or divorced women, for Native Americans, and for rural Americans to register and vote? Republicans and their presidential campaigners are fabricating a lie that non-citizens vote to sow fear and distrust of our elections. They are pushing their Project 2025 agenda today. New Mexicans don't want us to make it harder for them to vote. They are concerned about how hard it is to live. Yesterday, in the Rules Committee, a Republican witness said, "We could wait until later to take care of veterans funding." Why wait? Instead of do-nothing messaging bills and a politicized CR that's going nowhere, we should prioritize our veterans now. We should prioritize disaster relief funding now. We should pass a farm bill that helps our rural communities now. This rule fails our military. It fails our veterans, families, and neighbors. I urge a no vote now on this rule, and I yield back.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserves. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we heard a lot of fiction there. We've heard false and frankly ridiculous claims about how the SAVE Act makes it harder for certain Americans, including our service members, to vote. If my Democratic colleagues took the time to actually read the bill, they would see that under the SAVE Act, service members can show their passport, birth certificate, military ID, record of service, or any combination of these other options as proof of citizenship. There's absolutely nothing in this legislation that restricts or complicates voting for our servicemen and women. To suggest otherwise is just patently false, but it's also insulting. It implies that those who serve our country, those who risk their lives to defend our freedoms, are somehow less capable of meeting these simple and straightforward requirements. Mr. Speaker, our servicemen and women, they deserve better. They sacrifice for our nation, and we owe it to them and to all Americans to uphold the integrity of our elections by enforcing the laws of our land. But instead, Democrats across the country, they're unwilling to do so. Take my own state, New York. A non-citizen can register to vote without a Social Security number, without an ID. Before coming to Congress, I fought against New York City's outrageous attempts to allow non-citizens, including illegal aliens, to vote in local elections. In the face of what states like New York are doing, what District of Columbia has tried to do, and with millions of illegal aliens flooding into our country under the Biden-Harris administration, we need these safeguards in place today. Just last month, the state of Texas announced that it had removed 6,500 non-citizens from their voter rolls, with nearly 2,000 of those non-citizens recorded of having a voter history. Look at Texas. Just last month, they removed 6,500 non-citizens from their voting rolls. Virginia also removed 6,000 non-citizens from their voter rolls. Mr. Speaker, we cannot take issue of voter fraud lightly. And we cannot rely on the honor system. As much as the other side of the aisle thinks it's A-OK to not require a photo ID in this country to vote, we can't take the honor system for our federal elections, especially when we have millions and millions of illegal immigrants residing in this country and thousands of non-citizens registered to vote across this country. I mean, make no mistake, the flood at our southern border, the 10 million encounters at our southern border, this isn't by accident. It was at the stroke of 94 separate executive actions with Joe Biden's pen, with Kamala Harris cackling in the background, that this has happened. And you bet your bottom dollar that if somehow, by some miraculous effort, they have the White House, the Senate, and the House next year, they're going to get to work lickety-split on the biggest amnesty plan this country's ever had, and they'll all be voters. Mark my words, and I reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, my God, the Republicans must be really afraid of losing the November election if the conspiracy theories are already starting up this early. I'd like to ask unanimous request. I'd like to request unanimous consent to insert into the record an article from the Cato Institute entitled "Non-Citizens Don't Illegally Vote in Detectable Numbers."
Without objection.
At a press conference on the SAVE Act, the Speaker of the House said, and I quote, "We all know intuitively that a lot of illegals are voting in federal elections, but it's not something that is easily provable. We don't have that number," end quote. Well, Mr. Speaker, this body legislates based on facts, not on intuition or conspiracy theories. And maybe it's time for the House Republicans to get serious about their jobs and stop making laws based off their absurd conspiracy theories. And again, I would just say to the gentleman after that little rant that maybe he needs to be talking to his Republican members who all have basically said that the inclusion of the SAVE Act on this horrific CR is basically a gimmick. It's a gimmick to get people to look someplace else and not look at the fact that Republicans are not doing their job. And if you want to talk about an insult to our men and women in uniform, then I hope that you will join with me in defeating the previous question. Because if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to include $12 billion that our nation's veterans need for their health care. $12 billion that the House Republicans decided intentionally to leave out of their partisan continuing resolution. Mr. Speaker, with this unserious and unacceptable continuing resolution, Republicans are not only risking disaster assistance and domestic investments, they are also shortchanging veterans and jeopardizing their care. An additional $12 billion is needed before the new year to maintain medical care for veterans. That is just a fact. The House Republican bill does not include a single dollar of the $12 billion needed, shortchanging veterans and jeopardizing the medical services they need and have earned. Mr. Speaker, our veterans deserve our support. It is our responsibility to provide the care that they have earned. This inadequate continuing resolution does not meet the moment, which is why I'm giving my Republican colleagues the chance now to do the right thing and include the funding for our veterans in this continuing resolution. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of my amendment into the record along with any extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
And Mr. Speaker, there were lots of things that were left out of this CR, and the Republicans came up with the manager's amendment to try to address that, but they left out the $12 billion for our veterans. They left out $12 billion for our veterans. I don't understand that. There's no explanation for that. It is so wrong. And to discuss our proposal, I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from California, Dr. Ruiz.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
I rise today in opposition of the Republican-led 6-month continuing resolution that will devastate veterans and jeopardize their care. In 2022, when I helped lead the passage of the Honoring Our Pact Act through Congress, we promised veterans with exposures to toxic burn pits and other toxins that they would be taken care of. And just in fact, last week I hosted my annual Veterans University, and I heard from veterans directly about the life-changing impact PACT Act benefits have had on their lives. An additional $12 billion is needed before the new year to maintain this medical care for veterans. But this CR bill provides $0 for veterans' medical services for veterans and restricts access to the medical care they earned and deserve. According to the Office of Management and Budget, without the $12 billion, the VA would have insufficient funding to maintain medical care operations for veterans through fiscal year 2025. The additional funds requested for the Toxic Exposure Fund is largely due to the overwhelming increase in PACT Act enrollment. Our veterans need the medical care. The success of the PACT Act has been evident in my district alone, where over 5,200 veterans have filed a claim. Without this funding, the VA needs to begin addressing any potential shortfall as early as the first quarter of fiscal year 2025. This continuing resolution pulls the rug from under the feet of veterans who are finally receiving access to care and benefits that they have fought for almost a decade. The extreme House Republican majority seem uninterested in those commitments to veterans, and they are shortchanging veterans $12 billion. So I urge my colleagues to defeat the previous question. Thank you, and I yield back to the chair.
Chair is recognized.
I reserve.
The gentleman from Massachusetts reserved. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Well, I'm going to reiterate the fact it's very simple. The House Republicans have passed their Veterans Appropriations Bill. We passed it above the request of President Biden or whoever is drafting the president's requests at this hour. And the people that have had a lot to say in this chamber today, they all decided to vote no. They voted no for our veterans' health care. They voted no for opportunities to expand veterans' benefits. They did it for politics. They did it because it wasn't their idea. But this House Republican majority has funded the VA above and beyond President Biden's requests for the last 2 fiscal years, and we're very proud of that fact, and we will continue to do so. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues across the aisle, they've expressed outrage over the inclusion of the SAVE Act in today's continuing resolution. But let's be clear. The American people overwhelmingly disagree with their position. According to 2022 YouGov poll, nearly 2/3 of Americans support requiring proof of citizenship to vote in elections. And even more telling, 48% of Democrats, yes, Democrats, agree that proof of U.S. citizenship should be required. In 2022, a Gallup poll further underscores this. 79% of Americans favor photo identification requirements to vote, and that includes 53% of Democrat voters. In just this year, the Pew Research Center found that 81% of Americans want all voters to show government-issued photo identification to cast a vote. 69% of Democrats back this common sense safeguard. Why won't they? That's a question. What are you afraid of to require someone to prove who they say that they are? These aren't poison pills. This isn't partisanship. They are overwhelmingly bipartisan views shared by a vast majority of common sense Americans. Yet my colleagues would rather cater to a fringe element in this country within their party than listen to the clear will of the American people. Instead of supporting reasonable safeguards to protect our elections and prevent foreign interference, they continue to block widely supported measures. They claim to be defenders against foreign interference in our election, yet today they turn their back on protecting the sanctity of the vote. The numbers don't lie, though. Under the Biden-Harris administration, at least 4.6 million illegal aliens have been released into our country, with 1.8 million gotaways. We don't know where they are. We don't know who they are. We don't know why they're here. And those are just the ones that we're aware of. With millions of illegal immigrants, including violent criminals, now residing in the United States, we cannot afford to ignore the critical need to ensure that only American citizens decide the future of our nation. This isn't just about policy. It's a moral imperative to protect the foundational rights of American citizens. It's time for our Democratic colleagues to put aside their partisanship, to listen to 81% of the American people who support this, and stop threatening a shutdown over common sense election safeguards. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Oh, my God, Mr. Speaker, I don't even know where to begin. I mean, to be honest with you, there's just so much there. First of all, let me just say, let me read from a letter that the Secretary of Defense sent to all of us here in Congress. He said, a 6-month CR would set us significantly behind in meeting our pacing challenge highlighted in our national defense strategy, the People's Republic of China. The PRC is the only global competitor with both the intent and capability to change the international order. The PRC does not operate under CRs. Our ability to execute our strategy is contingent upon our ability to innovate and modernize to meet this challenge, which cannot happen under a CR. Asking the Defense Department to compete with the PRC, let alone manage conflicts in Europe and the Middle East, while under a lengthy CR, ties our hands behind our back while expecting us to be agile and to accelerate progress. So that's what the Secretary of Defense sent to Congress. So Republicans are here with a bunch of fake anti-China bills that will never become law. But what they are actually doing is hurting our national security. This approach, your CR, is hurting our national security. And that's not just, the Secretary of Defense saying that. As I said earlier, the Republican chairman of the House Armed Services Committee has said it, and is why he's opposing the Republican CR. So let's get that straight. The other thing is, on this SAVE Act, it is true that a military ID alone is not sufficient to meet the criteria of your SAVE Act. So, and is that how we thank the men and women who serve our country? In fact, many Americans don't have the kind of identification required to be able to comply with the SAVE Act. But that's even beside the point, because as Republican after Republican have said that this is a gimmick, this is going nowhere, this is just a soundbite during an election. This is not real. This is all theater. That's not me saying it. It's Republican after Republican saying that. And in terms of helping our veterans, let me tell you, the Republicans keep talking about the $112 billion in the bill for VA care, but guess what? These dollars were already provided in last year's bill. Both VA and OMB say that these dollars are insufficient and that they need an additional $12 billion or our veterans' care will be affected. That is what has been said to Republicans and Democrats over and over again. This bill provides zero additional dedicated funding for vets with toxic exposures. Zero. And I don't understand why, when you were trying to fix some of the omissions in the manager's amendment that was put in the Rules Committee, why this could not have been added. These are our veterans. These are people who have served our country. These are people who have been exposed to toxic chemicals, who are battling with all kinds of illnesses and diseases. The least we can do is make sure the funding is there so they can get adequate health care. This bill provides none of that $12 billion. I don't understand what my Republican friends are thinking. I reserve my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to inquire if the gentleman from Massachusetts has any additional speakers.
I'm the final speaker.
I am prepared to close. And I reserve.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
May I inquire how much time I have remaining, Mr. Speaker?
You have 6 minutes.
Okay. Mr. Speaker, we have 3 weeks left to ensure that our government doesn't shut down. 3 weeks. And instead of working with Democrats to keep the government open, what we have here is an awful, cynical, partisan, continuing resolution that has exactly zero chance of becoming law. Hell, as I said earlier, it may not even pass the Republican-controlled Congress. It's like Republicans won't even try to get the job done. They passed 4 appropriations bills out of 12. I mean, that's it. And they want a trophy for that. It is pathetic how little work has been done in this House. Again, they have sent a grand total of 4 appropriation bills to the Senate. Though listening to them last night at the Rules Committee, you would think that they had completed all their work and everything is wonderful. I mean, imagine thinking 30% was a passing grade. It's pathetic. At the end of the day, the Republican majority has failed the American people. And the Republican majority has failed the American people miserably. They want to condition keeping our government open on a Project 2025 pipe dream to disenfranchise millions of Americans at the ballot box. Let me be clear. The SAVE Act is not about targeting undocumented immigrants. It's about suppressing the vote of millions of American citizens. And again, I point out to what happened in the last election. The person who shall not be named by name lost, but didn't want to accept the loss, and instructed people to go out there and to submit fraudulent electors, and to try to fix the stoke all these conspiracy theories. And multiple people are now under indictment for trying to overturn the legitimate results of the last election. The threat to our democracy, the threat to our election integrity is the Republicans. My friends are willing to rip $12 billion away from our sick veterans, all to play political games. What is wrong with them, Mr. Speaker? They're pursuing poorly written bad bills that are soft on China when we could be doing the real work, teaming up across the aisle to strengthen our national security. It is a joke. It's embarrassing. All they bring to the table is destruction, disruption, dysfunction, and the dystopian Project 2025. Every measure before us today is a bad deal. And I urge my colleagues to defeat the previous question so we can help our veterans. And I urge my colleagues to vote no on the rule and on the underlying bills. Mr. Speaker, we have to do better. If the government shuts down because of their dysfunction, real people in this country get hurt. So we need to come together and get our work done. Enough of this partisan garbage. With that, I yield back my time.
The chair would remind members to refrain from engaging in personalities towards nominees for the office of president. The gentleman yields. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am prepared to close.
The gentleman is recognized.
These accusations, Mr. Speaker, they're not just dishonest, they're a pathetic act of desperation. In their scramble to smear Republicans, they've dug up some obscure policy document that was never endorsed by President Trump or any House Republican for that matter. And now they've thrown everything they can against the wall, hoping to scare the American people with their usual tactics of lies, deception, and paranoia. This, Mr. Speaker, is the Democratic playbook for 2024. When you're failing, manufacture some more fear. The reality is stark. Democrats are in complete disarray. They're heading into November on a runaway train. Mr. Speaker, it would be laughable if their policies didn't have such dire impact on the American people. So now, in a desperate, flailing attempt to distract from their catastrophic record of the last 3.5 years, they're trying to shift the focus away from the wreckage they've left in their wake. Their policies have bankrupted this country, emboldened our enemies, thrown our borders wide open, and crush the American people under the weight of skyrocketing costs and economic insecurity. But here's the thing, Mr. Speaker, Americans are just smarter than that. No matter how much they try to spread their undiagnosed cases of Trump derangement syndrome, no matter how many obscure documents they try to pin on House Republicans, they can't run for their abject record of failure. The American people see it. They feel it every day at the gas pump, at the grocery store, when they're paying their insurance bill, when they're trying to buy a new car, when a young family's trying to get into their first home, in their wallets, in their communities, in the safety of their communities. They feel it. Democrats can't hide from the disaster they've created, and no amount of finger pointing is going to change that. Mr. Speaker, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have made it clear that they would rather play political games as we work to fund the government and avoid a shutdown. They'd rather hoot and holler about spending levels in one department than vote for a common sense appropriations bill or to create a stopgap so that we can continue our work and make sure that we don't have a shutdown. They would rather stand in full-blown opposition to straightforward provisions that would deter voter fraud and ensure our elections are fair, free, and protected fundamental right of real American citizens. My colleagues would also like to stand before us today and oppose common sense legislation that ensures that we put America first in our dealings with our greatest adversary, China, or any entity, an international organization that's connected or subservient to the Chinese Communist Party. We must do what the Biden-Harris administration has time and time again refused to do in its policies towards China. It's put the interests in the needs in the security of the American people absolutely first. I strongly support the rule before us today, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question on the resolution.
The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker.
For what purpose does the gentleman...
I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of the Rule 20, further proceedings of this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12 of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess for a period of less than 15 minutes.